I love to find new ways to use my Spellbinders embossing folders, but today I have a warning. I found a material that I really do not recommend and actually slightly damaged my embossing folder. Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's take a look. I have the Spellbinders embossing folder of the month for October 2022. As you can see, it has a sort of Christmas theme to it, as there are ornaments hanging from evergreen trees and then some like holly berries and leaves and that kind of thing. I wanted to just play with a bunch of different materials with it because I like testing out new materials, and I, as you can see, have many Spellbinders embossing folders. Spellbinders did send me the embossing folder of the month as I am doing, exchanging for design work, but I was a big fan of their embossing folders long before that, so I was very excited to try out some new ones. Okay, so I tried out a couple of different materials. I tried embossing cork, foil paper, handmade paper, flocking paper, and sandpaper. And okay, so probably not a surprise that the one I really can't recommend is this torn up one. This is sandpaper, and I will say I cannot recommend this because, and you might be thinking, why would you even emboss sandpaper? I think sandpaper can actually be a really cool thing to craft with because it adds texture, and I have used it many times with dyes, and I've been able to like cut them and add like the texture of sand to a scene or something like that. And so I just kind of thought, why not? Just to test different things. But this is the one I've got to warn you about. And I know I should have saved that for the end of the video, right? Like, oh my gosh, you never guess what it is, but I'm just gonna be real with you guys. Okay, so it's gonna be really hard to see, but I'm gonna do my very best. There are actually scratches in my embossing folder from when I embossed with the sandpaper. And again, you're probably like, yeah, of course that happened. But it's just something that I wanted to give a try. And my folder still embosses just fine. It's not like broken. But those scratches, if I were to do like an inking technique with my embossing folder, where I just put ink over it and then, sandwich it in between, you're gonna probably see those scratches. So as much as I like to try things, I would not recommend that you guys give that a try. I would not want you to suffer any similar damage to your embossing folders. The other one that I would say I do not recommend is cork. I tried embossing this, and as you can see, the backing sheet embossed just fine, so it went through the embossing folder, but there's nothing to be seen on the front. Again, not overly surprising because cork is kind of cushy, so it doesn't surprise me that it doesn't really hold its shape. But you can die cut through it, as you can see, because this is kind of thick cork. And even though you can run it through and it will have an effect, it's just that because cork doesn't really maintain the embossing, because it has that sort of bounce back feature. So maybe if you have really thin cork, it'll work out well. This was from the Dollar Tree and it did not work. So definitely no sandpaper. Cork did nothing, so probably not that either, but give it a try if you have some thinner cork. I do have some that I can recommend though, so I don't want this video to only be negatives, and of course not negatives about this embossing folder because it gives, as you can see, beautiful results, just not on those materials. And actually, the sandpaper, I'll show you, it does kind of look pretty, but it's a risk. And if you don't have a good reason to do it, I would not recommend. Okay, so here is this handmade paper. This is another thing I picked up in a big old package at the Dollar Tree because I was honestly, sorry all that extra noise, having a hard time finding handmade paper anymore. And so, or like that look of handmade paper. And so it has like this cool texture to it, and some of them have like a little bit of variation, but they all have that like just a little bit more texture than you'd get on a smooth cardstock. So I thought they could be fun because you're basically layering the texture of the two. And when you emboss it, it just has this like smooth look. It's just a little more interesting to touch and a little more tactile. It's softer than standard cardstock. And so I really like the way it turned out. I think it's perfect for Christmas. And it also, I noticed it embossed beautifully and I didn't really get cracking like I might with a smooth cardstock. So I think the fact that the paper has a little bit more give to it to begin with means that it embosses really well. Although you can see this brown paper starts with quite a bit of texture, and once it's run through with the embossing folder, it does lose a fair amount of that background texture that kind of gets smushed out of it a little bit, but still very pretty. And I will show you some completed cards with these as well, particularly with the handmade paper. I was able to layer up the brown and the red together. I was able to use the original texture and cut out the background for my words so that I could kind of maintain that look throughout. And then I also cut the words out of the red handmade paper. And I really do recommend putting some kind of adhesive on the back, like double-sided adhesive, because it makes really thin dies like this work very well. In terms of you could just peel and stick it and you're not fussing with any glue. The next one is this self-adhesive foil paper. And I had tried like a shiny foil paper, but I was curious about more solid color foil paper and to see what that would look like. Because when you get like a mirrored cardstock, that gives you, it just really like a lot of light and images and stuff are bouncing off of it. So I thought a solid one might be interesting to take a look at as well. And it embosses beautifully. It's specifically, I mean, to be honest, I found this at a thrift store, so I don't even know whoever got it originally, but it was adhesive on the back. And so I was like, well, this will be fun to emboss, because I kind of just do that. I just like keep my eye out for things that would be fun to try because it adds so much interest to a card. And there you go, finished card with that background. And I actually found it was interesting to combine the embossing and the debossing side. So each embossing folder will give you a raised look, and then if you flip the paper over, it gives you a debossed look, which is where like instead there's like valleys in the paper instead of it being raised. And so you can use either side, especially like with this handmade paper was perfect for both sides. Something like the sticky paper where it had a clear backing. Now I can't use that side, but you could put it in the embossing folder the other way. And it's really fun to mix those up if you're using two embossed pieces on one card. So that's debossed, that's embossed. Okay, the last material, I saved this for last because I love it. So rather than saving the like mystery for last, I just saved what I think is really pretty. This is flocking paper from Deco Art. The purpose of this is to like transfer the flocking to a project. So like this piece here is flocked and it would have this beautiful like soft texture. And I just thought, well, that's just fun to like touch. And like I said, I'm always trying to find something new to use with my embossing folder. So I just embossed it and used it like as a sort of standard piece of paper, because even though it doesn't necessarily look that much different than cardstock when I'm just holding it here, when you get it in your hands, you know, you suddenly have that tactile experience. And that was really what I was all about today, is that tactile experience with my embossing folders. There definitely was some cracking when I did my sort of standard sandwich, but if you ever have cracking when you're using a material, just try a smaller plate. Honestly, when I was doing my embossing, I had like all kinds of plates out. I was like, oh, maybe I'll try the plastic shim with a standard plate, or this double cutting plate, I think it's called. And they're just all different thicknesses, and that helped me to find the best combination with my Gemini. And then the completed card. I don't know, like my circle so far is sticking to it. I was a little bit afraid of that because I wasn't sure if the flocking would pull off, but it seems to be just fine. Liquid glue can also be really great when you're working with embossing, because I find when I use my ATG, if I'm like pulling it and there's any sort of Because like sometimes the paper tears where it has been, sorry, I'm trying to describe this properly. So where you might get that little bit of white space, it's just kind of like been a little bit too smushed and embossed, and you get that little bit of tearing there. And if I were to run this along it, I usually will tear it more because this is providing pressure on it. So liquid glue can be great if you have any of those spots there that got just a little too much. So I hope this video was helpful and that my experimentation will mean that you don't have to experiment and you don't have to risk your lovely embossing folders, because yeah, I wouldn't want that to happen to any of you. So a little warning there. Not that, I mean, again, you're probably like, I was never gonna do that with my embossing folder, Jess. What are you talking about? But I promise sandpaper can actually be really fun to craft. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where I share more materials that work with embossing folders. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.